Hi everyone, welcome to NLF Live. I'm Monique and we're here with Michael today. Since it is the start of March and March Madness, Michael has an interesting topic about sports and the law. So let him take it away.
So March Madness is coming. It's the NCAA basketball tournament. Years ago, it was 16 teams. Then it was 32 teams. Then it was 48 teams. Now it's 64 teams plus 2 teams that play to become one of the 64 right towards the end in what they call the bubble game. And it's great. It's 3 weeks of madness, competition, not much school, even though these guys are supposed to be students. And one thing that just happened, excuse me, is the first time in history of the sport of basketball, it's happened in football a couple of times now, is a team that won the national championship just had it taken away. That was the Louisville Cardinals, and under coach Rick Pitino, a legendary coach. He's won championships at a couple of different schools. He coached in the NBA, but he also oversaw the program, says he knew nothing about it, oversaw the program at a time when what he described as parties put on for the players or recruited players or prospective players that involved girls and alcohol and some other things were put on in order to persuade some of these great players to come to his school rather than their arch rival Kentucky. They just got, that was made public, and the team was stripped of its championship. One moment. I don't know the Floyd Mayweather case very well. I know the Reuben Hurricane Carter case. I know what I was going to say is what it goes to show is the lengths to which certain things will be corrupted in order to win, because winning is the most important thing in sports, even in college when they're supposed to be students and athletes. In professional sports, it's a different story. Winning is the only thing that matters, and that means sometimes guys will do things that are illegal. Like in baseball, there were guys that used steroids to make themselves stronger and faster and to make themselves recover from injury and fatigue. More quickly. And it also made them huge. Barry Bonds came into baseball, a thin, kind of wiry, whip-smart guy who was real fast on the base paths. And by the end of his career, he was about twice the size that he was before. His arms were the size of ham hocks. And he was hitting home runs all over the place. He could always hit, but he was using steroids. Interestingly enough, when he was doing it, when Alex Rodriguez was doing it, when Roger Clemens was doing it, when all those guys were doing it, it was not against the rules of the sport. It was only illegal to buy it the way that they did and to traffic in it the way that it was sold to them, but it was not against the rules of baseball to use those substances. It is now. The way that testing is done is they do urine testing, and for steroids, I think they also do blood testing. In football, they do one drug test a year, one drug test, and they tell the players when it's going to be. So that means that all they have to do is stop doing what they do for about a month before the test, and then they're going to be fine. The only ones who get random testing, in the National Football League, the only players who get random testings are the ones who've already been busted once, which means that they were dumb enough not to quit before the test when they knew the test was coming. And they got caught and they got put on the suspension program, which means they had to go to a counseling program, and then they get tested randomly rather than one time a year when they know it's coming. Which means they probably have a drug problem, because if you can't give it up long enough to get through the drug test, then you probably just have a problem. It's too hard for you to give it up. Excuse me. As a matter of fact, some substances now are being studied, marijuana being one of them, is being studied to lessen the effects of brain injury on athletes, because it lessens pressure inside the cranium, which is a big problem when it comes to trauma to the head from any sport, let alone football, which is constant. There are several athletes that are the subjects of studies now, and I've spoken to them. I can't say their names, but I can tell you that some of them, you can tell when you talk to them that they've been hit in the head a few times. I mean, these guys are slow to respond. They're very kind of, serious look on their face. They don't always track what you're saying. It's a scary thing. Probably, I'm trying to think of the most famous. Here's the most famous criminal case relating to sports. It's not very new, but it gave rise to probably the most famous, one of the most famous sayings we have, which is, "Say it ain't so, Joe. Say it ain't so." That comes from, do you know, by the way? It was right at the end of the First World War in 1919. And the best baseball team in all of the league, by far in all of baseball, was the White Sox, the Chicago White Sox. But their owner was a guy named Comiskey. I don't remember his first name, Charles Comiskey. And he was a skinflint. He didn't pay his players enough. That was way before, 50 years before they finally challenged something called the reserve clause, which meant that ball players could say that they didn't feel like they were getting paid enough and they were going to go to a different team. Before that, they were owned essentially by each team. And Comiskey didn't pay his players enough, so they made a deal, 8 of them made a deal with a very famous gambler named Arnold Rothstein, who was essentially one of the heads of the mafia. There were really 2 mafias back in those days. There was the Sicilian or the Italian mafia in the United States and the Jewish mafia. And he was the sort of head or one of the heads of the Jewish mafia. And he told the players of the White Sox that he would give them a lot of money if they lost the World Series on purpose. What would they do? They'd drop balls. They wouldn't run as hard. They would do things to lose the games. And because they were so great and they were favored to win, Rothstein was going to bet tons of money on the other team, which was the Cincinnati Reds. I'm pretty sure it was the Cincinnati Reds. And then they'd make a lot of money winning the bets. This is all the gambling was totally illegal, but nobody cared about that really. And they'd bet all the money against the White Sox, and that became known as the Black Sox Scandal. They threw the World Series. They lost. They got caught. None of them went to jail, but several of them got banned from the sport. And probably the most famous one that got banned from the sport was a guy named Shoeless Joe Jackson, who was a player from someplace in the middle of no place, a country guy, could barely read or write, very, very uneducated, but a natural athlete and a great baseball player. I mean, a great baseball player. And when he was leaving the courthouse in Chicago, after being punished for it, the legend is some street urchin came up to him and said, "Say it ain't so, Joe. Say it ain't so." In other words, say you didn't cheat, but he did, and so did the other ones. Many people said that that's when America lost its innocence, when the Black Sox Scandal came in 1919, when baseball, the American sport, had been corrupted by nothing but money and gambling and crime. It was shortly after that, almost immediately after that, that baseball put into place their first commissioner. That was a guy named Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, and he's the one who banned all these players from the sport. Before that, there were no commissioners in sport. Why? Because it was a business. There was no commission. The idea that it's actually a commission and there is a commissioner is just something they made up to make it sound more official. For many years in baseball, until recently, the commissioner was just the owner of one of the teams. The guy's name was Bud Selig. He was the owner of the Milwaukee Brewers, and he was just the one he was the guy that the league owners decided would run the sport. Other sports have commissioners, and they're just really the president of the business. And sometimes they don't really have. There's no commission. There is voting, but it's not like there's some sort of democratic process involved. These are businesses, and they're very profitable businesses, and they're run for money, and it's why they cheat. It's why players will cheat. The money is way too good not to keep trying to make it. That's why owners will cheat. They colluded in paying the players for many years. There's all sorts of explanations for why they do it, but they do it because winning is the ultimate goal. And if you don't win, you don't make money, and you got to make money. And so the most famous criminal case involving sports was the Black Sox Scandal. The next most famous one was the point shaving scandals, where instead of losing, players just won by less of a score, and they gambled. And that was a big thing in college basketball for many years in the late 40s and 50s. And have we gone long enough? 10 minutes? 10 minutes? Okay. I hope that was interesting. Okay.
All right. Well, if there aren't any questions, that's about it for today. Thanks, Michael, for the insight, and thank you for joining us today. Have a great day.